Hello and good evening, everyone. Today I'm speaking again to Professor Wade Allison. He's a professor emeritus, actually, at the University of Oxford. He's a nuclear and medical physicist. And just again to the audience, it's very nice being back after a 1 month trip to Iran. And the topic's going to be radiation. For those who've been following me on Twitter, I've been exposed to high levels of radiation during the last month, and I seem to be fine. But Professor Allison, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. There are many places that I have not been. I have not been to Iran, although I would like to go. My impression is that it is a misunderstood country with some noble people with some very long traditions, but I've no direct contact. But I mean, I remember that once a schoolmaster rang me up and said, "Do you think I've got a blind student? I think they would like to study physics, and we're discouraging him because we think he wouldn't be able to read." I said, "I think you'd have an advantage because there are places that none of us go. None of us have been inside an atom. We've all got to rely on our imagination for what we would find if we went there. And Iran is certainly where my imagination has to tell me, but I'm very interested to hear from you what you have learned."
So I made the. I'm not going to repeat the mistake because you corrected me on that. I met a man who's been exposed to the most cumulative radiation in the world. I assume. I mean, it was my assumption. The population in Ramsar is exposed to 250 millisievert per year. Okay, to get the units right, and there's a healthy population living next to the holiday palace of the Shah in a lush green area that is surrounded by mountains next to the Caspian Sea. Really like a dream place, beautiful women as well, if I might say so. What do you make of that? Why isn't Ramsar a toxic wasteland?
Well, I think 250 millisieverts per year, which is just less than 1 millisievert per day. And in 1934, at the end of Mary Curie's, she died in 1934, but in 1934, the international experts, the people with most experience, who were members of the International Commission for Radiological Protection, that still exists, and they gathered together and they drew up an international limit, which is equivalent to about 2 millisieverts per day. So what you have in Ramsar is within a factor of 3 or 4 of what they thought was dangerous. When I say dangerous, I mean the level below which nobody sees any ill effects at all. So I am not at all surprised. And of course, if you turn the clock back to when life began on Earth, when many of the radioactive species in the rocks and so on had by that time not decayed, the radiation was much higher, and sometimes the radiation from space was higher. So life has been brought up under conditions and had to survive the kind of exposures that these people you found in Ramsar. So I think this is all very clear.
Can you maybe walk us then through radiation? You gave that background to Ramsar, which I think is very important. But how is it that we have come to fear radiation? Because there was a time in the 1930s and 40s, if I understand Marie Curie and all those great scientists, Pierre Curie, where they were embracing radiation, where they were excited about it, they were curious about it. And today we are scared of it. So what happened?
Well, what happened was in the 1930s, up to the 1930s, people knew about nuclear energy, but they didn't know how to get it out under controlled conditions. You could get it out from the decay of radioactivity, which happens in the earth and makes the inside of the earth hot and so on. But nobody knew how to actually harness it. And the person who found out how to harness it was a very clever woman, an Austrian of Jewish extraction, who was working in Berlin in 1938. Now, if you're of Jewish extraction and you're in Berlin in 1938 and people know what you're doing, and it's to do with radiation, that puts a wholly different political light on it without changing any of the science at all.
This was Lisa Meitner, yeah?
This was Lisa Meitner, and she escaped to Sweden and eventually came to the UK, and she is buried in a country churchyard in Hampshire in the UK. So, and I knew her nephew at Cambridge, who taught me nuclear physics. So there was a whole new political, social environment, and worse, in the United States, which lost their social nerve at the time of Joseph McCarthy, who accused so many in the American population, not just scientists, but politicians and actors and artists and poets and people, of being communist sympathizers. And radiation and nuclear and giving away nuclear secrets became such heavy politics. And it was at this time that these absurd super precautionary levels of attitudes to radiation were drawn up. Now, there was no science that went into any of that. There is, of course, much more science today, but none of it actually contradicts anything that was found in 1934 in Mary Curie's time as far as safety is concerned. What the biologists have understood now is how some of the mechanisms that DNA repairs itself and enzymes and cells get condemned and replaced by new cells, because of course cells are being replaced all the time in order to make sure that they're clean, and indeed life as a whole. Each of us as an individual gets replaced by family breeding and so on. And this is all part of nature's way of keeping life clean from the effects of radiation and indeed the effects of oxygen, because oxygen is actually a rather more serious source of generating cancer than radiation is. This business about plutonium being the most dangerous element in the periodic table is nonsense. Oxygen is much more serious.
Can you maybe explain that for the listeners? Why isn't plutonium so dangerous?
Well, first of all, radioactivity gives out radiation, but it doesn't multiply. Now, we know that viruses are dangerous because if you get one virus cell, it will multiply and make more and more and more. And the same is true of fire. We're all aware that fire catches, and you've only got to have one element of fire, and you get what really is a chain reaction, and the whole thing can go up. That doesn't happen with radiation and radioactivity. It does inside a reactor, but that's due to neutrons, and that is very, very quickly and easily turned off. So that's not the problem. So the fear of radiation and radioactivity is fear of something against which we are already protected and is not catching. Now, the most pathetic thing is to read, as happened at the time of Fukushima and indeed in Japan after the bombing, people think that radiation, you can catch it. You have to avoid people who have been who become radioactive. There's no need to do that. People after Fukushima were turned away from hospitals because the hospital staff thought they were contaminated and therefore would spread the effects of radiation. Well, nobody died anyway, but it doesn't spread like that. So it's the fact that it doesn't spread is one of the reasons we can be far more confident about the safety of radiation than about the safety of fire, because fire is horrendously dangerous, but because it spreads.
Well, one important point I think that you highlighted early on in the book, and again, it's this book, Radiation and Reason, I'm reading, I read, is that the person or anything that's radioactive cannot become more radioactive in the process. There's no chain reaction going off, right?
Yeah, I mean, in fact, it becomes less radioactive, maybe very quickly or maybe very slowly. I mean, inside the Earth are and inside rocks and indeed all of us are a few atoms of uranium and thorium and potassium-40, which are still left over from when before the Earth was formed several thousand billion years ago. But it's getting weaker all the time. And these are just the ones that are still going. But if, as happened after Fukushima, when the reactors were stopped, there's still 7% of the energy of the reactor goes on coming out in the form of radioactivity and radiation. This is what had to be cooled down. But after a day, it's gone down, and after a year, it's gone down, and after 1,000 million years, it would appear to be very little of it left at all. But so radioactive decay is actually a good thing, but it doesn't apply to arsenic or the kind of the chemical poisons.
In terms of Fukushima, because you were there after the accident, what were the mistakes that the Japanese authorities made?
Education.
Primarily education. Okay.
Because nobody knew what they were dealing with. Of course, let me take a simple example of waste. One of the most serious form of waste is human biological waste. And it's so serious that we teach children at the age of a year and 18 months that they've got to look after it and be clean. Otherwise, they won't be allowed out into society to play with other children. And that is very serious education that parents go in for. And as a result, except in places where the sanitation level is not available because there is not the infrastructure, disease is not spread too much by human biological waste, but it can be, and it's a very a seat of infection of other illnesses and so on. Excuse me, I lost my.
You okay?
Yes.
Oh yeah.
No, in Japan, at the time of the Fukushima accident, everybody in Japan learns at school not only about fire, as most of us did at our schools, but they also learn about earthquakes and tsunamis, and they know that when it happens, what they've got to do to make themselves safe. They don't wait to be told. They've had practices, they've been educated, and so on. And what happened at the time of the tsunami disaster, there were 500,000 people in the area that were subsequently flooded, and all but 20,000 of those escaped to higher ground because everybody knew what to do. That's education for you. And 20,000 people, deaths, is a terrible effect on a community. But they knew about it, and they understood it, and they survived it. But then along comes radiation. Nobody has told them anything about it. There are no plans. They do not understand it. They panic, and it's a small step from individual fear to collective panic. And unfortunately, they're still panicking about it now. And Germany, this last weekend, has shown that the panic is still going full chat, suppressing nuclear power, because they don't know about the world that they live in, and it frightens them. Well, they should have learned about that at school. So it's school, it's learning at school, and people, not just the authorities, but the children, everybody has got to know about the world that they live in. Wasn't that always the case?
How do you explain, well, just to address the German question, Finland fortunately opened a new reactor this week. So the good is offset by the bad. I can accept that. And Georgia, I think a few weeks ago in the United States, finally finished the highly delayed project. And that's fault of my profession, the civil engineers who were supposed to build it. They were delayed. They were doing, I don't know what they were doing. But how do you explain it that Germany, this highly sophisticated society, I mean, when I think of German engineering, you think of quality. You think of safety, right?
But just a moment. You're confusing technology and engineering with natural science. Now, natural science is how the world works independently of us. It's what would happen if we weren't here. Then there's technology, and which is the development of things built on natural science, and that involves research and development. It involves investment, speculation, but it better not step over the bounds of the way the world underneath it works. So I think German education, which was in the 19th century, German chemistry was world leading. But I don't think that their understanding of natural science has been good at all. And in fact, they have a policy of not learning about it. Now, it's true that Germany, of course, was on the front line of the fear of nuclear in the years during the Cold War period. So was Japan and Korea and other places. But Germany seems to be particularly they made a religion out of this fear. And that, of course, it's unstable. It does not respond to understanding and learning, which is why we've got to look right over the heads of the population of my generation and the generation below. We've got to get right to the children and give them confidence in Germany, everywhere else too.
A lot of this fear is based on the linear non-threshold model of radiation. The idea that no dosage is safe. Now, in your book, you adequately address this issue, but okay, maybe just re-explain to the audience. You touched on it a bit earlier why this is completely bogus science.
Well, it's bogus for an interesting reason, because in the physical sciences and in engineering as well, mathematics and linearity and the behavior of things behave according to certain equations and so on. But that's not true of everything. Somebody who shows me a plot that explains how house prices are going up every year after year, I'm not going to be terribly impressed. There are things to which mathematics cannot be applied rigorously, and it's going to fail. And one of those is things that have evolved, and they've evolved so that a little bit of something might be helpful, or might be okay, but a lot is dangerous, and so you don't get this it's good, it's bad, simple thing. And that's particularly true of living things. But it's also true of a radiologist friend of mine in New Zealand sent me a picture of his little dog called Rosie on the lawn. And Rosie has done a little wee-wee on the lawn, and where the wee-wee is, the grass has died. But just round where the grass has died, which got a little bit of the urine, the grass is thriving much better than further away in the lawn. So this is typical of a biological system in which nothing may not be very good, but a little bit is good, but a lot is bad. And the LNT model is like the house price thing, or stocks and shares. The price goes up. It went up yesterday, it's going to go up tomorrow. Rubbish. That's not a use of mathematics. So I'm a mathematician by background as well as physicist. So you can misuse mathematics when the system you're describing is not rigorously defined, because it has evolved and responds so that, for instance, we know that, and this is tried to cancer cells as well, if cells get a bit of radiation, if you don't give them enough to kill it, it can respond by evolving. So it treats it like a vaccination and gets more responsive. So the way we respond to radiation, or indeed anything else, like sunshine, which is just radiation, depends very importantly on how much radiation, how much sunshine we've had in the past.
Yeah. So a good analogy would be, a bit of sunshine is good for a full body tan, but a lot of sunshine is going to give you skin cancer.
Yes. And furthermore, if when you go for your holiday, if when you first go for your holiday straight from the UK or white, you're likely to get very badly burnt in the first few days. But after a few days, your body, your skin will start to respond. And this is a dynamic and incredibly clever. Biology is fantastically clever in a way that engineering and physical science is not. So it actually changes the way it responds. It's not just that it isn't linear, it's the response changes depending on the history of how much radiation you've had before.
So it's it's got memory. It's a dynamic system. It's non-linearity, I think, is the important word.
That's right. But it's people then spend ages trying to discover what this curve is, which distinguishes how damaging it is. Well, there's no good that the curve keeps moving in the light of experience. So you shouldn't even be, and many of my colleagues wouldn't agree with this because they're busy trying to tie down this thing. It's admittedly, you see, after World War II and the Manhattan Project, people thought that mathematics, physical science is a fantastic way to do things. It was immensely impressive. But in fact, that is not the only game in town. You should not be trying to do everything with mathematics. And in a way, the LNT model is an overreaction trying to apply the success of physical science to a biological system.
Well, I've had somebody else on here before, a cancer researcher, who said to me that part of the problem in cancer research has become a confusion of technology and science. People don't know the distinction. And, if you try and solve everything with measurements and instrumentations, and sure, there's validity to that. I mean, we're not discrediting that. You miss the biological process, right? I guess you're making the same argument.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, we know, for instance, that physical exercise is very important. In fact, my dog, the same one that has dug up my internet cable, takes me for a walk every day. And in the process of taking the walk, all the reactions of cells to effort and oxidation and so on is exercised. And if those mechanisms are not used, then they won't be there when they won't act when something more serious happens. So I like to, I think you may have seen in the book, if you have a physicist and a medic are considering going in for a marathon, and the physicist says, well, to run this marathon, I'm going to need a lot of energy. So he goes to bed for a month. And just before the marathon, he steps out of bed and says, right, I've been eating all these right things and my body is ready to go and charged up with energy. Whereas the medic has been running a little bit more every day, stressing his biological system more and more and more so that it learns to be able to deliver the extra energy. And guess who wins the race?
Well, the physicist, because he jumps into a car, but
No, he jumps into an ambulance.
fair enough. So you would make the argument then the right way to teach radiation would be in the biology class as opposed to the physics class, or you have to teach both. How would you teach it?
Oh, I think one of the, let me enlarge my criticism of education. I think the dreadful thing we do is to say to young people, what would you like to specialize in your education? And that will then become your career. And if you say, I want to be an engine driver, you'll enter as an engine driver, and then you'll be a member of the Union of Engine Drivers, and you won't be any damn use to the rest of society. We've all got, especially with our longer life nowadays, we've all got a duty to learn much more about not only about one thing, but about several things. And actually, even technically, the most useful technical advances are where two pieces of science overlap. So I think breadth as well as depth, breadth of study, because biology is so different to physical science, so that people who study physical science have no idea about how biology responds, and vice versa. And then there's no confidence between the two, and people get more and more cautious about the other side. So biologists are terrified at the extreme energy of provided by nuclear, and physical sciences are horrified by these funny things that go on inside medical cells and so on. So it's the breadth of education, and I hate being called an expert. I am not an expert. I'm preaching in favor of everybody having a bit of expertise, a bit of understanding of everything, at least enough to have confidence in it, and to have a friend who really knows about it, etc., etc. So don't specialize, and don't, when you choose your subject at school, think that that's what you're going to do for the rest of your life, because if it is, that's not a good development.
I think that's very good overall advice, and in particular as these things relate to public policy, because as you say, Germany is now panicking their way out of nuclear power, and that's, as you mentioned rightly, coming from the ignorance of the education system. So I want to sort of focus on the nuclear energy aspect of this, because that's why I got into this issue. I was trying to understand the public debate around nuclear energy. Is it a cost benefit? Is it an economic thing? And then I realized later on it's actually a religious thing. And we maybe speak to that point. How is it that science has become a religion in a certain sense?
Well, it's become a religion because it's become entrenched. And let me go to a question you didn't ask. Why has it become so expensive? It's become so expensive because it's defending itself with precautions, etc., against everybody else's fears. Now, I don't know whether you know the first nuclear reactor built, human reactor built in this world in 1942, December 1942, that was built in 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
2 weeks. And
how many years has Hinkley Point been?
Well, that's the point. Now, if in fact what you need to build a house, what you need to build a car, what you need to build a nuclear reactor, what you need is, first of all, you need to know how to do it. And if you don't, you need people, you need engineers. You need people. And then you need materials, concrete and steel, and some metals and so on, and water and so on. And you need land. Now, if you look at nuclear, you need a very small amount of land per gigawatt. We know how to do it. The first one was built long ago. There was nothing wrong with that. What is important is whether a particular nuclear reactor will have a lifetime of, as they do now, 60, 80, even 100 years. And that gives you much longer payback period. But what about raw materials? Well, you don't need anything terribly fancy. You don't need very much fuel. The fuel is, in fact, available from uranium and thorium. Uranium's dissolved in seawater. There's lots of it in the oceans. It's in Kazakhstan and Canada and Australia and Gabon and quite a number of other places, probably South Africa. I think South Africa as well. There is no shortage of fuel. And anyway, the used fuel, so-called, the waste, is only about 1% used. So if you want to, you can reprocess that fuel and use up what hasn't been used. So there's no shortage of fuel for 1,000 years or something. So that's the fuel. But it comes back to education again. What we do need is the people who know how to build it.
Yeah.
And these people are the people who've already built another one. That's the ideal situation. So this is what Henry Ford showed. If you can build one, you can build a lot. And we need to be building these things. And I'm not talking about tens, I'm talking about thousands of nuclear reactors. Because if we're going to replace fossil fuels around the world, we're going to need thousands of nuclear reactors. And what about the design? There are now masses of different designs of nuclear reactors. There's an embarrassment of possible small reactors, or big ones, or micro ones, and fusion and so on. Not all of these will come to fruition. A lot of them won't come to fruition because people didn't put enough effort into it. But we do not need the prolonged inquiries, safety exercises. These are what hold things up. Or insurance people. What good's insurance? Is the thing going to work? The only reason that nuclear reactors don't deliver the goods is either because somebody wanted to turn them off before they'd finished their job, or because they persuaded everybody to quit the construction before it got finished. These are all cases where people in Wall Street and the City of London or wherever don't have the confidence. They don't know what they're doing.
Yeah.
And the politicians. So it comes back to education again. If people knew more about the world they live in, I mean, there's one level of society who thinks that nuclear is something that was invented by the Americans in pebble glasses and white coats in secret bunkers. It isn't. It's part of the natural world.
Yeah, it's that level of ignorance
Yes.
regarding it.
If we get over that, nuclear will be incredibly cheap.
What do you make of the argument that we can resettle parts of Chernobyl or the exclusion zones on Chernobyl and Fukushima? Is that feasible?
It's not any feasible. They shouldn't have been they shouldn't have been evacuated in the first place. Now, on March the 26th, I published with the BBC. So this is not having written it and managed to get through them and so on. So within a couple of weeks of I said everybody should go home. Nobody's going to die. There is a point when there's an accident where you need to find out what actually has happened, and that happens quite quickly. I published that piece with the BBC on March the 26th, 2011, as soon as I saw a fairly reliable set of figures for how much radiation had escaped. And it was already significantly less than Chernobyl. I didn't get the numbers quite right, but that didn't matter. But there is a time just immediately after an accident where somebody's got to go and find out what happened, and you've got to make a decision. And during that time, you need to tell people to stay indoors and don't and take precautions. But that doesn't have to last very a week, not 11 years, 12 years.
And the precautions that you mentioned in your book, it's basically iodine salt and something of that sort.
Well, no, that's a particular case for radioactive iodine, but that's not even necessary most of the time, because by the time you get the iodine out to people, the iodine salt out to people, it's already the time has gone, because radioactive iodine decays in a week. So, but yes, you can do that.
Okay. So just do you have a number, if you remember, what the level was at Fukushima in terms of sieverts, millisieverts per year?
Well, where? I mean,
well, where the people would stay in, presumably in the evacuated area, because that's another problem I have with this debate, is they don't specify where. They don't give any numbers. They just say radioactive. It's scary, you know.
I know. Well, if you look in my article of March the 26th of 2011, I've got some numbers, and they are measurements. There was no need for anybody to evacuate. And the main problem is particularly old people. And if you stay indoors, you will avoid radioactive from the rain. But this wasn't ever a problem at Fukushima. Even at Chernobyl, the number of people who died was extraordinarily small. And that all happened quite quickly.
Have you looked into the data at places like, I think it was Utah, that is next to where they had atomic bombs in Nevada, and the population there, like, are they fine as well with that radioactive?
Yes. Oh, I mean, there are people, there are individuals, there's books and studies by people who not only are experts on radiation, who I agree with completely, but who were themselves as children in the region close to. Of course, the humans need excitement. It's part of the stimulation that we need. And if we can't have people murdered next door, then we'll have to we'll have to read novels about people being murdered, and that will stimulate us. And this is how we do things. Now, unfortunately, reality and fact and fiction get confused. We don't need, we don't need, we do need excitement. And the media know that our interest in excitement sells newspapers.
Yeah,
and they have a lot to answer for. Now, unfortunately, the people who become newspaper reporters are the people who didn't understand anything at school of what we're talking about. So they're the least suitable people to be telling us about what's going on.
Well, I always make the case they're highly literate and yet highly innumerate people, because
Yes.
the sense of numbers, and this goes across, it's not just radiation related, across engineering fields, electricity, power, they confuse these things all the time. And it can be very frustrating when you read the articles.
Yes.
You once said something to me about Chernobyl, where you said the animals do not watch scary Hollywood movies. Can you maybe explain why the animals are such a good control group for Chernobyl?
Well, I mean, it's the same effect that you have when they test a drug and they want to see whether the drug works. And they take clinical trials, two groups of people, one who are given the drug and the other who are told that they've been given a drug when they haven't. And this takes away the difference between these two groups of people, enables you to see how much is the effect of thinking you've been treated and how much is the effect of the drug. Now, so not only with drugs, but also with radiation, we need to look at the difference between people who think they've been irradiated and people who have been irradiated but didn't know it. Now, you've just come back from Iran, where people have been living quite happily. Most of them don't know that they have been irradiated at a quite trivial level. And that shows the fact that they are so healthy and live long lives shows that the radiation is harmless. So it's exactly the same logic as is used in medicine. Now, the animals at Chernobyl, of course, they are not told that that they're living in an evacuation zone. And so they're another good sample to look at.
And the animals are fine, as I understand it.
Animals are fine. In fact, there are some beautiful wildlife videos taken by the BBC and National Geographic and others of wildlife at Chernobyl. And in fact, they're much better off now that with the people who used to cram their style, and my goodness, the damage we do to the environment for other creatures should not be underestimated. But anyway, clear all the humans out of a region and the animals thrive from our absence.
So the humans are more dangerous to animals than radiation.
Oh, yes.
I tell you what, when I drove into Ramsar, I took about 30 minutes trying to find somebody that can show me where these, hot wells are, because the local population doesn't even know it. And we stopped at a shopkeeper, and I said to him, I'm looking for the most radioactive place in the world. And he almost ran away out of fear. So an old lady overheard us, and she said to us, I'm a child of radiation, because apparently during the Shah's time, they were looking for uranium in that area. And then she could direct us to the area. But, she said she grew up there as a child, that sort of led us there. But it shows you that even the people exposed to the most radiation in the world, they don't know it.
Well, of course, I mean, since the Roman times, including in Germany and Japan, people take the waters. They go to therapy spas where there's a significant contribution of radon in the water. Now, exactly how much benefit is coming from the radon and how much benefit is coming from the psychological effect of thinking you have taken the waters, we don't know, because people don't go to spas and don't know about it. You can't do this, the precise comparison. But people in Japan do go to spas. They're called onsen, and it is part of the Japanese culture. And the number of places in Germany which are spas, and in the UK, in Bath, and places where there's natural radon in the water.
Well, I mean, in Germany, the healthcare providers would pay for you to go to the spa. So the country
I believe so. I don't think they do in the UK.
Well, in France, apparently I can, but I mean, one of my colleagues said, he said the doctor has to book you off for 2 to 3 weeks, and I thought, well, that's an excellent idea. I'm going to go and see my doctor. But the Germans, just to get back to that point, who are getting rid of nuclear because they're scared of radiation, their doctors prescribe them to go and be exposed to radiation. I mean, they see the cognitive dissonance.
But that's a different part of their mind. One's politics and sociology, and the other is their own health, and they don't allow those two things to mix.
Okay, no, that's it's tragic that it works that way. Yes. So you make the point again that education is key here. If you look,
I think it's going to. I think. Yeah. If looking into the future, the next 20, 30, 40 years, we're going to take quite a lot of that time to roll out and build and deploy the nuclear reactors we need. And the education is going to take about the same length of time. So we've got to get started on both the development of the reactors and the development of the education. Now, people are developing the reactors, but they're not putting the time into the education.
Okay, so there's still a lot of work to work. But are you optimistic, though, that we're going to get out of this dogmatic human phase?
Yes, I mean, I think things are already better than they were. They're better than they were in Japan. Japan seems to have turned the corner, but Germany is still staring into an abyss. I think the only thing that we can thank Mr. Putin for is moving this up the agenda.
That's right. Rosatom has a monopoly, I believe, on, was it fuel or something of the sort? And there's an argument that Europe needs to make that itself now.
Oh yeah, but that's not a problem. There are so many sources of fuel, but the actual supply line for making European and American fuel for Russian reactors is taking a little time to set up, but I think that's more or less done.
Okay, well that's good news. Sort of the last question here: do you have a favorite reactor that you're really excited about?
Not really, because I want to be neutral about which kind of reactor. I do think that small is important because it needs to be local. You don't want to have like Hinkley Point C, a huge reactor which is hundreds of miles away. You want to build people's confidence by having a small reactor, which is a small number of miles away. So you just have a reactor for each medium-sized town, and it means that the children from school go on school outings there, and they know somebody who works there, and so on. That wouldn't be true if you had lots of very large reactors. And in that case, I think that some of what Mr. Macron is suggesting of with EDF of building more large reactors, I think that's not the best way to go. The other thing is, if you can have lots of small reactors, then the need for a grid which the number of megawatt miles, you don't have to move energy around so much if most of the energy is produced next to where people want to consume it.
Isn't there a risk of proliferation of nuclear weapons to this? I mean, what is your view on that? That there will be a race for nuclear bombs.
This is an old one. I think we have seen enough to realize that the evil associated with extreme weapons is the people. It's it's Putin and co. If it hadn't been for Putin, we have a good chance of still being working with the Russians as we have. They're very clever people, and their technology as well as their natural science is extremely good. The problem is the people. So, I mean, if you actually ask how many people died of radiation at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, well, they're in my book that you have read, or at least the study of the number of people who died, who amongst the 100,000 survivors whose health has been studied for 50 years. We know how many of those died of cancer, and we know how many of them would have died from cancer anyway. And the difference between those is pretty small. In fact, it's far less than the number of people who died as a result of being moved out of their homes at Fukushima.
Yeah, that's correct.
We've got things out of proportion. Now, the bang and blast of a nuclear weapon is horrific, but it doesn't last very long, and it doesn't go very far. I mean, it might go a few miles, but the radiation, I'm not bothered by it.
And what about the argument that the smog will rise into the stratosphere and cause nuclear winter? Is that plausible or not?
Yeah, I mean, volcanoes do that. There was a year 1816 after the I'm trying to remember the name of the volcano in eruption in the East Indies.
The year without summer, I think it was.
That's right. Now, so that sort of thing happens, but it doesn't last very long. And as I say, it happens anyway. So we can be hit by meteorites. We can have volcanoes going up and causing a nuclear winter. And for a short time, at least, that will counteract global warming. We haven't talked about global warming, but I mean, that's a can of worms as well.
Well, you're almost suggesting that nuclear weapons is a solution to global warming.
No, I'm not.
Okay.
I'm just saying it would counteract it for a year or two, like in 1816, but that wasn't a nuclear weapons.
Okay. Well, Prof. Allison, I'd like to thank you very much for this conversation. As I said, this book is called Radiation and Reason. You've got another one, Radiations for Life, I think it is. And
That's right. Well,
astonishing.
which is more recent and has got more in it, but it doesn't contradict anything in Radiation and Reason. I need to, I think, to write what will be my fifth book, but I haven't had time to write it yet.
Well, I find it remarkable that at your age you're still working and you're still fighting guys like Paul Dorfman from Sussex in the newspapers.
Oh.
So please keep up that fight. And I'd like to thank you for this conversation.
Thank you.